Dear friends, good evening. My name is Dr. Tihomir Radcic. I am a historian, foreign policy analyst for Slobodna Dalmacija in Split, and I write about historiography. What you see here is my book, Serbia's Guilt for the First World War. I wrote it over 4 or 5 years. It was so long that I can't remember exactly. I managed to obtain original documents from Serbia. Everything I will talk about tonight and what I've written countless times in Slobodna and what was in Croatian historical truths you can find with Dujmovic are Serbian documents. This is very important. We are looking at the story from the perspective of official Belgrade. This is very important. At the end, I will mention why this is important today. Those who think history is something to learn and then forget, thinking it's dead, are mistaken. This book is important for us today because it reveals what is still in Belgrade, though the events occur from 1905. But it is important for us today. What you heard is a Chetnik dance song, a Chetnik love dance song. These Chetniks in Macedonia have nothing to do with the Chetniks we remember from the Second World War. I mean, not much. Chetniks in Serbia today are presented as a People's Revolutionary Army, which I will explain more generally later. So this is not condemnation, not approval. Fact. This is the first presentation of the book. It was postponed. The tourist season. I was on television with it 4 or 5 times. 200 copies were sold in Croatia, in Serbia, in Croatia and abroad. Friends from Croatia bought and sent it to Serbia. A week ago, I received 2 or 3 emails from Serbia saying, let's see what the truth is. Because everything there is really overblown. Now, what interests us in this story? This is the key person. You all think he is a Chetnik. But he officially wasn't a Chetnik. This is Vojislav Tankosic. He was an officer in the Serbian army. He received 3 promotions. He was awarded Medal for Military Virtues. And he wasn't even in the army. He was involved in Chetnik activities in Macedonia. He wasn't, but he was. Very important. I will repeat this at the end. The Serbian army does not intend to attack Kosovo. Today. That's what Vučić told the American ambassador. We won't, for sure. Then why are they at the borders of Kosovo? So that game isn't, but it is ongoing. What interests us? Behind him stands approximately 400 people to whom the Belgrade government directly, including Nikola Pašić, gave approximately 40 million euros in today's money. In the period from 1905 to 1914 for terrorist activities. In the book I wrote revolutionary terrorists because they saw themselves as revolutionaries. But to me, it's state terrorism, and you'll hear later Dujmovic says you're right, it's state terrorism. Therefore, without exposing him that he was arrested in 1914, as he should have been. He was arrested in 1914 and then released after 2 days. Vučić arrested his friend who entered Kosovo, and imagine, after 2 days he released him. Any resemblance is not coincidental. This is my favorite. My book, Serbia's Guilt for the First World War, has 2 academic reviews. One is my friend, Professor Dr. Anđeliko Miljardović, and this book is written not to sit on the shelf. It has 90 parts. Each part can be read individually. The most important is the 5th part. It details how much the Belgrade government spent on what. There are also memos. Give him this much money. Employ his people. Mind you, Chetniks who got state jobs. We'll call them again when needed. Serbian documents, that's important. And from that we see reality, but we'll also have fun. It also brings actually love gossip. King Alexander married a woman 9 years older. So they hated him and her for that. Alexander Obrenović. Then they tried to forge that she was pregnant. So it was a European scandal. Then this one said to him, this advisor told him, the prime minister told the king in private, look, she's barren, she can't give you a son. In such brutal words as are brought here. And in that thinking, they eventually cut them. Cut them, you'll see now. They cut them with swords, and that's... This book also brings brutal episodes. So, Vojislav Tankosić, but everywhere it's written as Vojin. So the 11th, June 1903. Russian ambassador Nikolai Charikov at 4 in the morning from the royal court and told the officers who were there, for God's sake, gentlemen, take their bodies inside the court. Don't leave them in the rain exposed to public view. Full stop. It was raining that day. 2 hours before that, those conspirators, among them was he, were searching for the king and queen in the court. Then they were hiding. Then the power went out, so they hid in some cupboard. The queen mistakenly called the soldiers because the soldiers thought they were on their side. Then there's a scene where the king comes out of the cupboard. Then he says to the soldiers, what's with you? You swore loyalty to me. They are loyal to the king. Then they looked at each other for 2 seconds. Then one of the assassins pulled out a gun. Here's a sign of loyalty, boom, boom, boom. Then the others, boom, boom. Then they drew swords, cut them up, and threw them out the window. Details are inside. And then those who did it themselves said, it was somehow hip, horrific. These things actually happened in Croatia in the 18th century, in the 19th. They didn't. So this is now. There are more gruesome episodes listed here. I'll tell one later separately. A book that's a university textbook in Serbia. I can't read because of that. However, I apologize. Neither Vojislav Tankosić nor Nikola. Pašić are actually significant. Serbia then had 2.9 million inhabitants. It had an indescribably small GDP. Most of the population was, Croatia was poor then. Serbia was even worse. They lived off primitive agriculture. There was a bit of industry. They borrowed 90 billion euros from everywhere to arm themselves. This is simplified now. It's explained in detail in the book. However, this is important. What happened in some small Serbia is unimportant. However, in Europe at that time, Germany was a huge power in the centre. This is Germany's sphere of interest. The French and English were very afraid, the French most of all. Croatian intellectuals of the time copied France. The Germans were terrifying. The British tried to negotiate with Germany, but it didn't work, so they became enemies. The Italians feared Germany, as did Austria-Hungary, which was an ally. Germany dominated the area from the North Sea, the Baltic Sea, to the Black Sea, de facto as the Romanian king was German, to the Adriatic Sea. Croatia was in Germany's sphere of interest. When you get home, think about whether Croatia is in Germany's sphere of interest today. Even though it's the European Union, even though all nations in Europe supposedly love each other, think about whether Croatia is in Germany's sphere of interest and how much official Berlin's decisions affect official Zagreb. All right, let's return to history. In such a situation, everyone was rattling their sabers in 1905. They rattled a bit, then in 1912, when the Balkan Wars broke out, everyone rattled a lot. After the Sarajevo assassination, they watched who would strike first. And then when some foolish young man comes along, deliberately used, some foolish young man who kills the Sarajevo, then everyone struck. And there you have the First World War. If it weren't for that foolish young man with strong ties to Belgrade, there wouldn't have been a First World War. Or it would have been later or different. Now then, this is a deep wound in my heart. Before the First World War, Bulgaria and Serbia were, so to speak, looking to divide the Balkans under Russia's wing. Of course, Russia is the big brother. If this reminds you of today, it should. Bulgaria intended to create a great Bulgarian state from the Danube to the Albanian border to the Aegean Sea. Macedonia was key. Serbia, which was a small landlocked country, dependent on Austria-Hungary for transport, wanted to reach the Adriatic Sea or the Aegean Sea. Macedonia was crucial. There was a tug of war. That's why all these Chetnik actions happened in Macedonia. Serbs were killing Bulgarians, Bulgarians were killing Serbs, Ottoman soldiers were killing Bulgarians and Serbs plus Greeks. Absolute chaos. That's the context. Now, the painful Croatian wound. Croats were creating Yugoslavism. In Croatia, Yugoslavism has existed since the early 19th century. And Croats who pursued the creation of Yugoslavia couldn't see this. This is the agreement between Serbia and Bulgaria under Russia's wing. Russia roughly said, let the Bulgarians have Macedonia. Macedonians are Bulgarians. And you have a natural area of expansion among the South Slavs. And then it was meant to be a South Slavic kingdom. And of course, that's Serbia. Nikola Pasic was still at the end of the 19th century. He wrote saying in Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, there are Serbo-Croats who are one people. And they don't have their own state if that state isn't Serbia. Those are his words. 1914, for the Slovenes, is the craziest. He went in 1914, right around this time. He went on an official visit to the Tsar of Russia. So he asked for 200,000 rifles, among other things. And then he talked about the Slovenes. Croats are, of course, Serbs. Everyone in Bosnia and Herzegovina is, of course, Serbs. And they can't wait for Serbia to liberate them. And the Slovenes supposedly have their corrupted dialect, but they will become Serbian. Now, I'm simply summarizing half a page of text. And the Russian Tsar said, oh, yes, yes, and you will have 500,000 soldiers. Ah, so you are a great power. That's the thinking. That's behind this Yugoslavian. Otherwise, this map is from the University of Houston or something like that. It's rarely used in Croatia because of the Yugoslavian legacy. We are all like South Slavic brothers. So we should love each other, not just count, but truly love, which is, I think, a big shortcoming. So this is the map, and this is Nikola Pasic that Serbia had. You will see later in the book, it says there are 5 to 6 variants. When the First World War broke out, at least to Klagenfurt, and he sent it to the English, French, and Russians. We agree. Please, documents. So this concerns us, everything. In the background of this story, something was happening, which in Serbia at the time was called, so I'm talking all the time about the government. To avoid misunderstandings, people are inclined, and when I talk to educated people from Serbia, when I talk to our people, they say the government is not to blame. As if the people are not to blame. Well, I'm not talking about the people. I'm talking about the 50 people who were at the top of the government, who were replaced. They had 2 parties, the Radical Party and the Independent Radical Party, who alternated in power. But they roughly wanted the same. Now, the Belgrade government in 1905 organized the revolutionary terrorist network, which operated in Ottoman Macedonia, which was in the Ottoman Empire. And it operated from 1908 in Bosnia and Herzegovina, with the fact that in 1908, they gave their word to European states, their word of honor, we will disband the Chetnik units that are entering Bosnia and Herzegovina. They didn't disband them, but they gave their word of honor, the top of the Belgrade government. Now, in this story, this young man, Vladimir Gacinovic, if you've ever read, if you're in Serbian and Yugoslav historiography, is a young, passionate poet who dreamt of revolution and freedom. I am now conveying their opinion to you. So, the unification of Yugoslavism, of course, under Serbia's guidance. In reality, Vladimir Gacinovic organized, among other things, a terrorist network in Eastern Herzegovina for the needs of the Belgrade government. In Čapljina, he engaged a local Orthodox priest to organize terrorist groups to destroy the bridge near Gabela and cut telegraph lines. This is his report to the government. In Trebinje, he caught a local merchant to organize terrorist groups that were to destroy the local railway and infiltrate the Austro-Hungarian fortification in Trebinje. Plans are still listed there. That's how it's done. But that's not Yugoslavism as we imagined it in 1920. And as we were taught, oh yes, money is everywhere in this story. Today I spoke with Mr. Ivoštav, the municipality's love driver. We talked and concluded that life is better when you have money. We didn't really discover any wisdom. However, this Vladimir Gacinovic served about a year of his Chetnik service. He was a poet and organized that terrorist network, and then he received a scholarship of 12,000 kuna monthly for studies in Switzerland. The calculation is almost honest. The Belgrade government resolved people like that. So you serve, then you study somewhere abroad. You spread the Serbian idea. Makes perfect sense. But I repeat, that's not Yugoslavism. As everyone taught us, there's also lying involved. You said. Great Britain knows everything, and today knows everything. Believe me, I read then and now. They knew when Putin, they knew exactly where and how Putin would attack. But they didn't tell the Ukrainians until they agreed with the Americans. 1907, the British ambassador came to Pasic and said, look, we know you're organizing Chetnik groups that kill civilians, Bulgarian civilians in Macedonia. Stop it. Simplified in the book, it's one page of text. Pasic said no. The Serbian government spent about $2 36 million kuna annually on that terrorism. The British government knew they were spending. He says, what the National Assembly approved, that's for cultural activities and for Serbian refugees from Macedonia. And the Chetniks organized themselves, and they financed themselves. At the same time, he writes, so those same 907, there are letters, give that Chetnik so much, give that Chetnik. So that's lying. In the book, I wrote cover up, but it can be called lying. And now these documents have vivid stories. In Macedonia, there was a man named Neis. I didn't find his surname. He went from town to town, from tavern to tavern, partying at the expense of the Belgrade government, sending reports. So there are reports. Vojvoda Naci for lunch, for dinner, for wine, for coffee, for tobacco. In the range of 30,000-40,000 kuna monthly. Of course, he fought with Bulgarians in Macedonia, fought with Turks, but that's part of the story. Now, I must admit, preparing for this, I came to what Dujimovic told me. Listen,
In that residue, it doesn't overlap.
Decisions at home are for
the Chetnik Rite.
They weren't decided on the General Chetnik, right? Do we impose it here and one exists? This was...
Recorded at the...
End of June last year. At that moment, I thought Dujmovic was exaggerating. However, now I think it's fair and accurate to say state terrorism. I mentioned here 6,000 kuna. In the meantime, we've had inflation. So it's roughly 36,000 kuna annually. Million kuna, apologies. So, and mind you, the whole time the Belgrade government knew that war was being prepared. They knew they were doing foolish things. These are Pasic's words a month before the war broke out. 2 months. They will have to improve the financial situation, raise taxes, and mobilize more troops. Prepare the army, mobilize the people who will be convinced to fight for the Serbian cause, and wait for the development of major events that are being prepared. Romania, Russia, Serbia need to work on this. Montenegro will go with us. One is small from Serbia, which admittedly wasn't so small then. In the meantime, it has grown. The Prime Minister knows that the First World War will break out and is preparing. Pretending not to, but actually is. This is between 12 and 16,000 kuna. 1,000 dinars. Such banknotes were popular, circulated from Nikola Pasic, who was the president of the Belgrade government and foreign minister. And Vojislav Tankosic, who supposedly wasn't a Chetnik, and who was allegedly an officer of the Serbian army. But in reality, letters were sent. There are payroll lists. There are payroll lists. Give Tankosic this much. Employ his people. In Serbian historiography, they try very hard. Pasic is not guilty. Pasic didn't know. As far as I know, he didn't have any mental disorder. So on one hand, he wrote, and there are documents that he wrote. Do you know that the government is responsible? Please. Aside from the fact that someone might not like it. And the craziest thing is, this is laughable. I don't know how much you'll laugh. So 2 or 3 years ago, when I got those Serbian documents, it's like this, so many thick books, documents in Cyrillic, and I took them to Suborna Beach, read them, and I found this passage. Nikola Pasic writes to his, let's say, county head, translated into Croatian, you can issue ammunition. But carefully so that it is not known from which side. Please. The weapons of these Chetniks were hidden in county administrations across Serbia. I think they were called districts. I laughed all day at this. We didn't, but we did. But come on, but don't let anyone find out. I mean, that's ultimately intelligence activity. But then that's not the Yugoslavism we were taught. I deliberately underline that. I say this to everyone. Those who are my friends who agreed with Yugoslavism have nothing to say when these are the facts. Now, everyone has heard of the Black Hand. And in world historiography, Western, I mean primarily European and American historiography, to Apis, Dragutin Dimitrievich Apis, they give great importance because he was the head of military intelligence. However, in those Serbian combinations, we have a government terrorist organization, we have the Black Hand who supposedly don't know about each other. And they supposedly don't like each other, and indeed they don't. But the same people are in both organizations. When Austria conducted the investigation, they couldn't understand it at all. Both the Black Hand and the National Defense, it all got mixed up for them. When I looked at the documents, the Black Hand wanted everything. They wanted a coup in Serbia. He brought the Karađorđević to the throne. He wanted to remove them. One of his acquaintances said in 4 terms. Previously, we threw the king from the 1st floor. This king will throw from the 3rd floor. And you try being king. Right. No matter how strong your rule is, a royal officer who is in the king's guard, they wanted to remove the Karađorđević, so they considered introducing a republic. Besides him, Bogdan Radenković is absolutely vivid. An Orthodox defrocked priest, diplomat and agent of the Belgrade government, whom the Belgrade government in 1912 wanted to install as an Orthodox bishop in Macedonia. The peak. He later writes in his memoirs in those documents, well, it's a bit awkward, I've long since parted with faith, and he finished this Orthodox seminary. But he says, I've long since parted with faith in those things, I do what I do. But for political reasons, they wanted to make him a bishop. Now then, they wanted to remove the king. They wanted to create a Serbia that would encompass Serbian provinces roughly like Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, Macedonia, Kosovo, the whole of Croatia. And in that area, they had their people. Because supposedly all those people are Serbs from their perspective. And of course, they wanted to destroy Austria-Hungary. Mind you, Austria-Hungary had 51 million inhabitants. Serbia had 4.4 million inhabitants after the Balkan Wars. And it was a multi-ethnic state just like today. Do you know that Serbia is a very multi-ethnic state? Very much so. As a state of the Serbian people, but still it's some kind of Balkan empire. Just a moment, now then. In recent years, people ask me why I even deal with Serbia. When someone sees that I've read so many documents, why don't you deal with our history? There's a lot unexplored, and that's true. However, this concerns everything, and very much so. This is Frederick Ferdinand, the Austro-Hungarian representative. He was a very strict Catholic conservative. He married Sophia from a low nobility, so he was supposed to marry a princess. He married an ordinary noblewoman. He quarreled with his uncle Franz Joseph because of that woman. She was also a very strict conservative Catholic lady. He wanted to reform the Austrian Empire. There are countless plans for the reform of the Austrian Empire. This is one, and don't tell anyone. This is the most interesting to me. To be honest, 2014. An American historian says, when you look at that land, well, it's a great Croatia within the reformed Austrian Empire. So, to be honest, quite a few of my friends were touched by this. Oh, don't tell anyone that. So, when he was killed in the Sarajevo assassination on 28/6/1914, the Serbian ambassador in Vienna, Jovanem Jovanović, known in Croatia as Jovan Jovanović Pijon, is mentioned in the Croatian encyclopedia. He was an educated gentleman. He says, the fear of trialism was removed, which was often discussed around the heir apparent, as a more radical solution to the Yugoslav problem. Hello? In this calculation, Montenegro and Serbia were to join Greater Croatia in the future within a reorganized Austrian Empire. such a solution for Yugoslavia, indeed discussing the Yugoslav question, this solution questions the Serbian world and Greater Serbia. We have a state with Zagreb as the capital, centered around Croatia. And of course, he is terrible and dangerous and frightening. He had his shortcomings, however, this concerns us. I had an analysis of his plans on the Slobodna Dalmatia portal this summer. Croatia was to have limited statehood within that empire. Yes, Greater Croatia, but with limited statehood. And my acquaintances who support Yugoslavism say, well, what do you want? That wouldn't be Croatia. And yes, in 1921. Croatia was abolished in Yugoslavia. And it was restored only in 1938. The Croatian state was abolished in Yugoslavia. That's important. And the one restored in 1945 was incomplete. And yes, one more addition. Ferdinand planned to be a strong ruler with a strong army, strictly Catholic, militaristic. When asked what he intended with the Balkans, he actually didn't know. He said, are there Catholics there? No, then I don't care. Those are his words. So those are the facts. And I'm sure many people today, 90% of my acquaintances would sign Franco and Josip's program today. Catholic conservatism and Greater Croatia. Now, this will be brief. I ask you, try. I've been dealing with Serbian nationalism for a quarter of a century in Dalmatia and the Balkans. And I know all the tricks and nuances. So try. Our singer, this is Guslar 1, recorded about 10 years ago. In Serbia, Guslar festivals are still held today. Look how he sang about us in Serbia.
We
supposedly understand him. That's the logic. After appearing in Croatian Historical Truths, we received many messages on social media. I won't mention the swearing now. He says, do you understand me? Well, yes, I understand. See, that's it. That's the level of thinking. Gavrilo Princip had the Kosovo myth in his head. The Kosovo myth, simplified, it's very tiring for me because it's completely irrational. Simplified, it goes. Suffered defeat. It became an Ottoman vassal. Disappeared as a state. According to the Kosovo myth, it ceased to be a state and moved to the heavens. And heavenly Serbia lasted until 1912, when the Serbian army conquered or liberated Kosovo. If you think I'm exaggerating, remember last year when Novak Djokovic had a victory, he had some tennis victory, and then somewhere in Wimbledon he exclaimed with delight and said, "Serbs are a heavenly people." And then the editor calls me, quietly asks what's up with him. And then he saw himself as a normal European Serb with those outbursts. I tell him, I've just told him now. I told him what I had told before. Why the chills? No, it's not my... Serbia is currently on cloud 9 again. Why? Because there's no Kosovo. According to that Kosovo myth. Now we can mock, but it's a serious emotional political factor. And because of that, a war could break out. Now, Gavrilo Princip had with him from 100 to 1,000 dinars, depending on sources. That means from 1,600 to 16,000 kuna. Revolvers and bombs. I wouldn't give someone 15,000 kuna and bombs and weapons to wander around. And that's important. I've written that many times, but what does this concern us? In Belgrade, there's the Balkan wolf. That's a wolf, not a puppy. This is very important. We tell our mate we'll dig up the wolf, pancetta, la 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 la. That's not realistic. This is funny to me. Have you heard of Miško Jovanović? His name is top notch. This is a real person hanged in 1914. It goes like this. Miško Jovanović was a secret agent of the Belgrade government. Those revolutions in Bosnia and Herzegovina. To the public, he was a merchant, an activist of the Serbian Cultural Society Prosvjeta and the president of the Serbian Gymnastics Society, Sokol. So please, cultural materialism. He was at the Serbian reading room in Tuzla on the 3rd June 1914. He welcomed Gavrilo Princip and 2 other Sarajevo assassins. And there, well, the lads told him, Babro played and so on. They were dealing with the police. A few days later, another Belgrade agent came to him bringing a box of bombs. A shoebox with bombs. Has any of you received a shoebox with bombs? I am not. So the agent brought him a shoebox with bombs. He smuggled them from Tuzla to Doboj by train. And another agent transferred them from Doboj to Sarajevo. Miško Jovanović was of age at the time of what he was doing. That's why he was sentenced to death by hanging. Gavrilo was essentially underage. I was a month short of reaching adulthood, which was then 20 years. And Austro-Hungary was a state of law. Please, love, he's not a minor. We won't hang him. There's no death penalty for minors. 20 years in prison. Miško Jovanović was hanged. And now, one question at the end. Is there anyone today like Miško Jovanović who, behind cultural amateurism, promotes Belgrade's secret politics? I leave that question to each of us. I've heard various answers to those questions. Now, a view from Europe. The UK knew, France knew, Austria knew halfway. This is the British foreign minister, and always this educated gentleman who knew everything that was happening. They had an excellent intelligence service. Roughly, maybe Serbia is to blame. And like the trial in Sarajevo. After the Sarajevo candidate, Austria-Hungary conducted an investigation. And in about a month, they gathered documents, right? Tankosić. Tankosić was no ordinary Serbian army officer. He was dealing bombs and weapons. The British ambassador in 1912 went to the Serbian foreign ministry. By the way, this, mind you, these are taken from a Serbian book about Ralph Paget. Ralph Paget despised Serbia. He was an ambassador in China, in Europe, and then when they transferred him, sent to Serbia, he was furious. Among other things, he says, mind you, what he says about the foreign minister, it's fine that the Serbs pretend they won't interfere with Austria if she leaves them alone. But they simply cannot resist intrigue, because the prospect of creating a South Slavic kingdom is almost irresistible. Ralph Paget has no reason to lie. He is not a nasty Croatian nationalist. He is a Brit who didn't care. He states facts. The investigation reached Vojin Tankosic in Austria-Hungary, and then Austria-Hungary demanded the extradition of Vojin Tankosic or for Austrian agents to come and question him. The Belgrade government said that was out of the question as it violated Serbia's national sovereignty. After that, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia and thus began the First World War. If Tankosic had been arrested then, if Tankosic had been arrested then, the history of Europe would have been different. That's why this book, this is 1% of the book, that's why this book is Unmasking Official Belgrade. Now today, my editor often, anymore, but until a few years ago, he would say quietly, don't bother me with that history, give me something current. As if something has changed. It hasn't. This is the Brussels-Washington view. The article is available online. I think in PDF online. So history is living roughly like this. Serbian President Vučić has a military terrorist intelligence network operating in Montenegro and Kosovo, in Bosnia and Herzegovina. He doesn't need it because there is a Serbian state there. Republika Srpska is a Serbian state. However, this network is not made up of Chetniks, but football fans. Our group of hooligan fans is called the Janissaries. That's some partisan. They serve to cause unrest in Kosovo. These Janissaries clashed with KFOR and the Kosovo police. Then the Americans accused the Kosovo authorities of being too strict, and Kosovo was under silent American-European sanctions for a while. Then last year, in September, Vučić's trusted man, along with 30 people, broke into Kosovo. The same route once taken by the Chetniks. They were killed there. Vučić's man survived. He was arrested in Serbia. Then released to defend himself at liberty. But as if you mustn't flee anywhere. The Sarajevo assassins all fled from Srpska. We don't know where they are. Vučić in Brussels and Washington looks like a very powerful Balkan leader with whom negotiations are held. Because if he wants, he can bring lasting peace between Serbia and Kosovo, thus stabilizing the Balkans. Vučić is sending ammo to Ukraine because in Serbia there's Soviet calibre ammo. This pleases the Americans. He promises Europeans he'll recognize Kosovo. But he promised that in 2012, Serbia in 2012 gained candidate status. Once they promised to recognize Kosovo if they were given candidate status. But Serbia can't recognize Kosovo. Serbia can't remain in limbo forever. This story of heavenly Serbia is very serious and dangerous. So history is not to be trifled with. The New York Times published 12 pages last May. Transcripts. EUPOL was eavesdropping on Vučić and his people. In the transcript, there's how you deal with opponents. It says you kill him, then grind him, and then burn it. Disaster, all right? We're nearing the end. It says here, the major is alive. This is Vojislav Tankosic. Vojislav Tankosic died in 15. They will defend their country. When Austria-Hungary attacked Serbia, he loyally defended his country and deserves recognition for that, because he defended Serbia, regardless of Serbia's blame for World War I. The major is not alive, but the major is alive. And what is that message? Today, if the major is alive. A t-shirt costs no 20 kuna in Serbia. You can order it online. And someone who comes with a t-shirt, the major is alive. What kind of mindset is that? Everything I talked about earlier. Chetniks are heroes. Well, yes, of course, that Chetniks are heroes. This is a university textbook. Serbian Chetnik action. That's enough. It's quite, let's say so. The data is accurate, but it's laudatory. But there's one episode inside. I read the book. After that, I put it away. I sent it to 4 or 5 friends, come on, roughly like this, in Macedonia. A Chetnik Vel fought with the Ottoman army. All his Chetnik friends were killed. He used up all his ammo. He broke his sword. Then he took his own life before the Ottomans, so they wouldn't catch him, to keep his secret safe. Retreated to the library. That's a brave hero. I find it chilling. What will a student think reading this? Thank you kindly. God forbid. So, my book is for a cold, rational, and patriotic approach. Not like the Brits. They think of Britain, but we Croats think of Croatia. A friend of mine, he died long before I was born. Yes, he died long before we were all born here. Took time. Lazar Markovic came to Croatia, a lawyer from Belgrade, who brought, remember those 1,000 dinar notes? He brought 1,000 dinar notes and gave them to the media. Everyone took the money. Except Frano Supilo. He knew what was behind that money. Behind the Yugoslav story is Greater Serbia. Secondly, Frano Supilo later in WWE. Supilo self-educated. 4 languages. He was respected in Europe. Thank you kindly. No one was as respected in Europe as they are from Croatia today. He learned from the Russian foreign minister. The London Treaty was signed. Half of Croatia was given to Serbia. Half to Italy. Who in Croatia today is as patriotic and capable as Supilo? I leave the answer to you, but we need to be like Supilo. Thank you for your patience. And I will gladly answer questions.